Hello everyone, Rachel here, and I wanted to come on today with my friend and trauma healing expert and a woman who's been a therapist to me in my journey of healing and transformation, Juliet Yelverton, who runs the Healing Waters retreat centre in Glastonbury and is an expert in trauma healing. And so hi to you, Juliet. Thank you for coming on. Great to see you there with your white Tara in the background. And I just thought it would be really useful at the current time to talk a bit more in depth about trauma and trauma healing, how we recognize it, how we transmute it, especially in the current times, because it feels to me that we're living in very triggering, activating times at the moment where lots of fear is coming up, lots of anger is coming up, also lots of addiction and disassociation, coping strategies, and also at the extreme end there's people who are depressed and even committing suicide. So I know that all these things have their roots in trauma, so it would be really helpful for you just to talk to us a bit about these triggers and why they're so activating and what's going on at the current time.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel, for giving me this opportunity, for inviting me, and the opportunity to speak from my perspective of what I've learned through years and years and years of my own self-healing process, and also many years of working with other people, maybe 30 years or more of working with other people who have experienced trauma. And as you say, these are really, really activating times, very intense times, and everybody's residual trauma patterns appear to be actually being amplified at this moment in time. So the one thing that is true for everybody at this moment is that we're living in complete uncertainty. We don't know what's going on. We don't know why it's going on. We have various points of view about that. And this being in this situation of unknowing, and also having our liberty, our personal liberty, restricted greatly, and actually being put in a state of fear, means that our residual trauma pattern is really, really brought to the surface. Like everything that we may have been able to keep the lid on previously is now coming up in a really big way. And because we're all in so much fear, we're also being put into a lot of conflict with each other. So best friends are falling out, mothers and daughters falling out, husband and wives, because we're all trying to make sense of what's going on, and we're all trying to cope with a real intensification of our own trauma patterns.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, to me, it feels a bit like an echo of what happened last year with Brexit and this whole very binary yes, no, right, wrong, remain, leave. And now we're into a similar place of either you believe in the virus or you don't believe in it, or you believe you should wear a mask or you don't believe you should wear a mask. And yes, we must have the vaccination, and no, I don't want the vaccination. So this duality, separation, fight of, it's almost like, to me, it feels like almost deliberate. There's a deliberate, constant division, trying to find ways to divide, conquer, separate, and to put us into this sort of conflict situation. I mean, do you feel that there is an agenda behind it, or is this just is this just human nature?
You want my truthful answer on that?
Yeah. Let's be really truthful, because.
Okay. I mean, so now we're talking about geopolitics and not about trauma, but actually they're really closely interlinked.
Yes, I do believe so.
Yes. So what we have two major factors. One is that we have a planet that is massively traumatized. Every person on this planet more or less is traumatized. either with things that have happened in our own personal lives or the collective trauma that we've been born into, and that we haven't managed to process any of that collective trauma. So that's the collective trauma of war, natural disasters, all the things that we remember just in the last 20 years, 9/11, all the different things that we've
and scarcity as well, things like debt and fear around scarcity, and am I going to be able to pay the mortgage this month and survive?
Absolutely. So there are a lot of factors that are going on constantly, like poverty, famines, war, natural disasters, climate damage, and so on. So we could say, oh, well, we're getting traumatized by all that, and we were born into a trauma field. So that is a kind of natural consequence. But then there's another thing when you ask, is there an agenda? And I think what we've got to look at now is the possibility, the very real possibility that there is an agenda. And from my point of view, I have spent hours, days, weeks, months researching, and I would say without the slightest hesitation that there is quite definitely an agenda. And you can look at the smaller picture of our country, or you can look at the bigger global picture. It would be a huge conversation to go into all of it, but just within our own country, our government is taking advice from an organization. I think it's called SAGE. So it's an organization that is about how do you increase the level of fear in people? How do you model social behavior? How do you control social behavior so that you get people to do what you want them to do? So the government could reply, okay, well, yes, we are doing that, but that's because there's this very big threat of the virus, and therefore we have to do it for people's safety. That's going to be the fallback reason. Somebody called, a woman called Polly recently did a video looking at Amnesty International definition of torture, and what we see playing out in society is exactly the same process as a torturer would do to their victim.
Really?
And yes, it's she's called Amazing Polly. So she does this analysis every week, and she looks at lots of data, lots of information. She tracks through relationships of people, what they're doing, connections, and so on. And one of the main things about torturing people is that you're doing it for their own good. And I think you've been reading that book, For Your Own Good, The Roots of Violence in Child Rearing.
Yeah, I had to stop reading that book, Juliet, because it was too horrific.
Yeah.
And I found it was actually quite traumatizing for me to read, particularly as I was reading at a time when my children were in a similar kind of danger, I felt.
Yeah.
And I had to stop reading it because it was too activating for my nervous system, interestingly. Maybe I'll finish it soon, but...
Yeah, we'll do it in a resource way, because when we read, when we look at things that are traumatizing or describing terrible things, that is traumatizing to our nervous system. That's why violent films are traumatizing.
Yes.
So we have to really do it in a resource way if we are going to look at that material. But to come back to what I was saying, the roots of violence in child rearing for your own good. So this is always a line that torturers give to their victims. This is for your own good. And that's what we're hearing blasted out through the TV channels, which the media is controlled by the people who have vested interest in us having vaccinations, for instance, having the vaccination. Okay,
yes.
So I don't want to go too deeply into this, because people will start saying, oh, but there's this data, or there's that, and this disproves this and that. Let's get down underneath all that information and let's look at the bigger picture.
Yeah, so it is the roots of PSYOPs, though, isn't it? I mean, Dominic Cummings is a master of PSYOPs, and the government knows that people who are triggered or activated, whose trauma is activated, are very easy to persuade and herd. because your frontal cortex is literally closed down.
Absolutely, and we can come into the biology in a moment of trauma. But yes, that is what's happening, and the government is being guided by an organisation that specialises in that, so that the government can control what we're doing.
Yes.
State of fear. So that's happening. But I watched a very interesting video analysis last night by Polly, where she tracked all this back to Nazi Germany, where she said this way of looking at things and the science and so on stems all from just the Second World War period, where at the end of the Second World War, where a lot of Nazi soldiers were made prisoners of war, and the USA made an offer to them to come on their side and be spies for them.
Yeah.
And that's interesting because the USSR did the same. So half of these soldiers went to Russia and half came to America. Well, you need to listen to her analysis, because she tracks the movement of these soldiers and the information that happened and the organizations that they set up over several generations. And she links back people who are in control now and in high scientific positions of high science, to what was happening back there. And there's a very definite, a real trend and connection between individuals developing population control, mind control, the science of mind control, eugenics. So this is quite obviously a factor at work. I can't explain everything, but I'm really happy to give the link where she shows this book, this data, this person was here, this person influenced this person, they learned from that, they put into put a program into place. And that's what we have happening at this moment on the planet, a very definite agenda, which also then links into the whole thing. I don't know if you've been aware, I'm sure you have, the human trafficking, how huge.
Oh, wow. That's another huge
so part of
horror story, isn't it?
It's all part of the same thing, because I think in the White House, they're doing everything they can to stop human trafficking at the moment, and they had a figure of 25 million people being trafficked at the moment.
Wow.
And
So Juliet, I mean, so the world is filled with kind of horror. It is, to me, it is a bit of a labyrinth of horror at some level. I mean, obviously there's some beautiful things in the world, but there is this.
I just want to add to the agenda part. So the thing about the human trafficking, and particularly paedophilia and horrific crimes against babies and children and satanic ritual, is that there are many world leaders, pop stars, media stars, celebrities that are all part of this whole thing, where they've been engaged in paedophilia or satanic ritual, and they have been filmed and they are blackmailed. So the blackmailing of these people is really key in being able to run this agenda.
Okay, interesting. Wow. So yes, I mean, it is a whole can of worms, really, which who knows whether we'll ever get to the bottom of it. And also with so much fake news being pumped out, who knows what is true and what isn't true. So let's just bring it back into individuals.
So how do we tell what's true or not true?
Yeah. So I'm just really, I think for people who are watching, maybe let's bring it sort of from global back to personal, of how do I know when I'm activated, and how do I know when I'm normal, rational, and how do I know when I'm in an activation? Because I think that it's really interesting, because obviously I've trained in trauma with you, so I notice when people are in an activation, and yet most people are totally unaware, and it's like, no, you're the one who's got the problem, sort of thing. There's a really interesting denial. So talk us through how you kind of know when you're activated, when you're being pulled out of that center of Zen calm.
Um, well, it's context. It's like if we're always used to being in a state of activation, we don't know that there's anything different. But you might get to a point where your life becomes so dysfunctional, unmanageable, and you feel surrounded by so much despair, conflict, etc., or you feel suicidal. It's the symptom pattern that's coming up for you that is going to inform you that there's something wrong.
Yes.
That's the first thing. And I have the experience that almost every person I speak to has something going on in some shape or form that's meaning their lives are dysfunctional. Yeah. So the next thing to understand is what I teach in my program, healing program. It's like the starting point. It's beginning to track in your own body, your own self when you're getting activated. So I don't know if there's any point to go through all this right here in this moment about what's happening in the primitive brain that puts you into fight or flight, and if you can't escape, into parasympathetic shock. But the thing is that if you are in either of those states, the frontal cortex, your thinking brain, is switched off, along with your immune system, along with your sex drive, along with your digestion. So not only do you start to become very ill, and that's what gives rise to all the symptoms we see, but you also lose your capacity for critical thinking. It doesn't mean to say that you can't think and there aren't thoughts going around. It just means that your thoughts now are reactions and not responses. So you hear something, you get triggered by something, and you go into a reaction, and then you start to blame or project or be angry or feel despair, hopelessness, shut down. You can't be present to what's happening and bring your critical thinking online and explore the situation you're facing.
Yeah.
You lose your capacity to be human. And whether it's gender or not, or just trauma, that's what's happening to humanity at this moment in time. We're losing our capacity to be human.
Yeah. And one interesting thing that just to put into this is, because I'm obviously in the world of business and mentoring, and so I've just done a whole load of mentoring sessions for the NatWest Accelerator program, which is kind of highly driven entrepreneurs, and it's very interesting to notice how many of them are what you would call, or in trauma terms is called, stuck on. So, you know, they talk fast, they think fast, they want to move to action. And I always get to a point in the session where I say, you know, do you ever stop? Do you ever meditate? Do you ever pause? And it's so rare for these people that, in fact, they find it very, very difficult to just be and to do nothing, because even trying to meditate, it's just their mind is going a million miles an hour. So talk to us about this kind of stuck on this. It's almost like a program, isn't it, that we're embedded with, that we've got to be doing, and we can't seem to ever stop.
Yeah, so what's happening when the primitive brain gets activated, it's that you're put into fight or flight, and that if you don't do something immediately, you're going to die. Yeah. So that was the original situation that put your brain into that state. So that could be something like we know about, which is like terrible accident or abuse or an attack. Those are the common things. And people often say, oh, that's never happened to me, so therefore I'm not traumatized. But it could be also developmental trauma. So a child that hasn't had a nurturing, caring relationship with their parents, or a child that has had everything given to them and it's seemed like the perfect life, but the actual connection, attunement and so on hasn't happened to the child. So that's just as dangerous for a human baby, not to have that attunement, even if its physical needs are met. The other thing is that surgery can put you into that place.
Bullying at school,
bullying.
Boarding school particularly, I notice, is a particular one.
Boarding school is a really big thing, yeah. Anywhere where a person's been disempowered, not seen, not heard, not respected. So witnessing other people suffering, witnessing violent things on the TV, for instance, or witnessing famines or war. TV is very graphic about what's going on around the world, so we see it all the time. So this is how, even if you haven't had a really terrible thing happen to you, that these other factors, they're wearing away at the nervous system and putting you into this feeling of danger. So it could be a one-off event, or it could be a sequence, a steady drip, 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 drip of slow things, like being stuck in a difficult marriage, for instance, or a difficult job over a long period of time. Anything where you can't get away from. This feeling of being trapped is fundamental to creating trauma in the nervous system.
Yeah. So Juliet, tell us, I know this is such a huge subject, so I'm asking you the impossible here, but tell us, give us an essence of how to heal the nervous system, how to heal trauma, and an assurance maybe that it is possible. But I guess first we have to recognize it. But then what are the things that we can do to start to heal our nervous system?
Okay, so the definition of trauma is not the bad thing that happened to you, but the impact in your nervous system. That your brain is stuck either in fight or flight or in parasympathetic shock. And it's usually both of those at the same time. That means that your capacity to think clearly and to be human is greatly diminished. So that's the first thing. And what we're talking about is your primitive brain that's to do with defense strategy. So that's the primitive brain at the back. So seeing, recognizing, maybe listening to this discussion and going, oh gosh, maybe I'm suffering from trauma. Okay, I know about that now, so now I can stop being traumatized. That doesn't work because you can't think your way out of trauma. There's no neural pathway from your thinking brain back to the primitive brain. So you have to employ sensory information to turn off the activation in the primitive brain. And you do that via giving yourself pleasant, reassuring sensory information. So you need to work with trauma through the body. So I was with a client this morning that was telling me about CBT therapy that she'd been doing. But that has a certain cognitive behavioral therapy. It does have a certain value, but it's not fundamentally helpful in healing trauma because it's working with the mind.
Yes.
Need to work through the body because the vagus nerve that is able to connect through the medial frontal cortex to the primitive brain then is able to turn off the activation. So the first step in healing trauma is about resourcing, about giving yourself positive sensory awareness that calms the nervous system so that you can slow down, so that you can turn off, so that you can rest.
So this idea of safety is really important, isn't it? And I remember when you were helping me several years back when I first came to you, and I of course said, I don't have any trauma, but I'll come and experience what you do anyway. And then I realized that I was in a very unsafe domestic situation and therefore constantly on a sort of predator alert. And even now to this day, sometimes I wake up like in the night and I can feel I'm holding a lot of tension in my shoulders and neck, which is almost like an armor. And I have to like literally try and, oh, that's interesting. I'm like in predator alert even when I'm asleep. So this primitive like shielding, this trying to protect ourselves is a really interesting one about not feeling safe.
That's right, because when we're in fight or flight or parasympathetic shock, the body is mobilized for defense. And when we're traumatized, we're stuck in defense postures. And that's not just that the brain is activated all the time, but it's actually in your body, held in your body, frozen in the body. Whatever you're having to do to protect yourself at that point in time is now frozen. You may be completely unconscious of it. I also do cranial sacral therapy, and quite often when you get to a place where there's been an accident and a limb is kind of holding the energy of that accident as you begin to work with it, the limb will release the pattern that it went into when it was trying to protect itself.
Yeah.
So this is what Dr. Peter Levine calls frozen trauma energies.
Yes.
So we can only release these frozen trauma energies through working through the body, working with sensory awareness, creating safety in the body. So if you remember that trauma is a result of lack of safety, is a result of danger, healing trauma is a result of safety. So, but to create safety is a complex thing.
Yes.
So I once found that I used to use the term, feel into a safe place in your body. And now I say feel into a comfortable place in your body, because the word safe itself can be highly triggering. And for some people, when you say, are you safe, immediately makes them feel unsafe. It brings them to the awareness.
Yes.
Unsafe. Another factor is people that have had sexual abuse from family members that have wheedled their way into a connection with the child, for instance, by appearing to be nice and kind, and then abuse them. So safety and niceness can be very triggering to those people.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a complex thing, actually, being able to create safety, creating the right environment in order to start healing.
Yeah. And let's just touch on the connection between trauma and addiction and resources, because I mean, I know this is a big one for me and many other people, of that, you know, when you're activated or triggered, to soothe that you know feeling, it's just like, oh, I just need a large glass of wine, or just something just to help me, just to take the edge off of that. And so that's a classic thing, and it's very interesting whether it's alcohol, whether it's sugar. That's another big one to try to, and I notice that sometimes with my children, they will just have a massive sugar craving and want biscuits, to the point where I don't actually have much sugar in the house, because I just know they'll just hoover it up, you know, at certain times. Like if they come back from school, they might have had quite a stressful day and want just to eat lots of sweet things, you know. So it's really interesting to notice this addictive patterns which are sitting on top of unresolved pain and trauma.
Yes. And of course, Dr. Gabor Mate is the expert and has really brought to light a lot of things around addiction. And that he says, instead of why addiction, why the pain, what's the pain about? And that anything in which we're in any situation which we're addicted, that it's an attempt to soothe the pain.
Yes.
And that it's important to know, and this is a concept in cranial sacral therapy very much, is that the body is always working to heal itself. And the planet as a whole is working to heal itself, that we are a self-healing organism, both ourselves individually and our culture, our society, and the planet, that there's always this movement towards self-healing. So in this case of where there's severe pain from any number of reasons, we want to soothe. And addiction, going into a pattern of addiction, creates dopamine, which is the feel-good neurotransmitter.
Mm-hmm.
So when we become addicted, we do things that is self-soothing. So alcohol becomes self-soothing, workaholism, any kind of addiction you want to think of. And there's a stigma. Some addiction patterns are really bad, like heroin, alcoholism, and so on. But other ones are really good, like being a workaholic. What I'm highlighting is that some addictions have a big stigma too, and people are treated really badly for having that addiction, and other addictions are accepted as being okay, and people are even rewarded for having those addictions. And exercise is one of those things. People that really are high achievers, they really drive themselves, but there's an addictive quality to this. Yeah. So in either case, people you know, you can think of performers or ballerinas or all sorts of people that are in the creative arts, for instance. They're actually quite possibly highly addicted because it takes that kind of push, push, push in order to achieve it in that way as well. But what's the underlying condition there that's causing the pain? That this focus to the exclusivity to everything else is an addictive process.
Yeah.
And so what's the difference between addiction or just doing something and doing it really well? And that is when that thing that you're doing intensely is then causing you difficulty within your relationships, within your family, and within your life. So if your life becomes dysfunctional in all other respects and your relationships are breaking down, you're suffering in many other ways, then what you're doing is addictive.
Yeah, yeah. So, Juliet, I know from my own experience that learning about trauma and understanding the nervous system and recognizing trauma patterns in myself and other people has really helped me to firstly do deep self-healing, but also to be a much better mentor, because I recognize, and also a much better mother as well, because I recognize trauma patterns activating in others. And I know that you've put a lot of your teachings and your experiential work and the somatic work into a whole program to help people to really understand some of these trauma dynamics, and to practical exercises to help them work with this somatic experiencing. So just talk to us a bit about your 4-month program that you've created through putting together loads of different material to help people to really understand this subject.
Yeah, okay. So as I said, to heal trauma, you need to work through the body. You need to build sensory awareness. And in doing that, you're actually helping your brain to integrate, because when we're traumatized, parts of the brain become fragmented and different organs in the brain begin to shrink. And we lose our capacity to self-reflect. So when we start healing trauma by doing sensory, somatic type activities, we build our capacity for self-reflection. So this 4-month program that I've created, which is possibly, if you can't come and do one-to-one therapy with me, then doing this program would be helpful. I'm not saying I'm the only person who works with trauma. That might come across wrongly. There's many, many, many people that you can work with. But if you can't get to a therapist that understands trauma, then doing this program may be helpful. And it works on building sensory awareness. It works on increasing your medial frontal cortex and integrating your brain by building repetitively certain actions, certain ways of doing things, certain thought processes. So it's a series of video exercises where you sit down and you listen and you do various practices that will begin to build. That's like building a muscle. Yeah. Or learning to play the piano. You're building implicit memory in the body by repeating and repeating.
Yeah, yeah.
The other factor is relationship, is that in order to heal trauma, you need to have safe relationship. And it's quite hard via video and so on how that can happen, but by making those videos, and I have worked to make that program as relationally congruent as possible.
Yeah.
So you can still feel there's a connection here. There's a relationship and there's a connection, and that even though I'm on video, that I'm actually at the other end and you can approach me for support as well.
Yeah, it is an interesting thing actually, Juliet, through working with you, but also having trained with Dr. Gabor Mate and sort of looking at a lot of the videos from the other trauma experts. They most of them tend to be men. So Dr. Peter Levine and Thomas Hubel and Dr. Gabor Mate, Bessel van der Kolk. So it's quite interesting working with you because you are you have this white Tara energy, this Buddhist energy running through it, which gives it, and it feels very feminine, and it gives it a kind of very peaceful sense of calm and this real spiritually healing energy, which kind of is not quite there as much when I watch these men. Not that I've got anything against them, they're all brilliant, but I think that that's the uniqueness of what you do, is that you bring the spirituality and this peaceful, calm, healing, almost like a mother energy into it.
Yes, and thank you for sharing that, Rachel. Yeah, and it's the compassion is really, really important, and I know for sure that both Thomas Hugel and Dr. Gabor Mate talk about compassion, but it's how much can we, as we're growing and learning and healing ourselves, and we're practitioners with other people, how much can we be compassionate? How much can we be compassionate to ourselves, to our own suffering? And how much compassion can we bring in to a relationship with someone else? If you think about, humans are extraordinary in that they need a very long time being taken care of as babies. This mother, we're so highly developed human beings, our nervous systems, that we need this very, very safe, long, highly attuned relationship with our mothers in order for our brains to grow, in order for our brains to really be integrated and to function optimally for a relationship. And that anything that we can do to attune to that mother-child relationship and to heal it there, then that is significant in healing trauma. So I think maybe that's the part that I can bring in to the work that I do with people.
Yeah. And so one final question, Juliet, because this has been fascinating, and I know that we could probably talk for hours about this, you and I, because it's a fascinating subject when you start working with trauma and understanding just how the tentacles of trauma are at the roots of all sorts of issues in society, like mental illness, like depression, like addiction, like war, and this, how desperately this pattern interrupt is needed to break this cycle. So what I just want to close by asking you is, do you foresee a time in our lifetime where we will heal collectively, individually and collectively, heal sufficiently to transform the way of being on this planet so that we can restore peace, harmony, balance, and to be a much more healthy, healed, whole society?
Yes, I have complete confidence in humanity and our ability to self-heal, and that I'm witnessing more and more people doing that, doing this personal work for themselves. And as we do that, and we are able to be in safe relationship with each other, we can build this container and this consciousness, and then be able to witness socially, globally, what's happening. So just as you need a one-to-one relationship for personal healing, for a society, a global situation, we need groups that can be conscious and hold the witnessing for what's happening in society. And I think we're at this tipping point at this moment. It's being called the Great Awakening. There's a lot of very uncomfortable things happening, difficult, challenging things, but at the same time, there's this massive shift happening in consciousness. And I'm completely committed, absolutely, totally committed in doing everything that I can for this global healing. And that's the work that I do, not just the one-to-one therapy work, but building the trainings I do to enable other people to hold spaces for groups and for this larger healing.
Yes, Juliet. Yeah, I'm. Thanks, Eddie. I absolutely am a witness. I've known you, wow, for nearly 10 years now, probably, and I just really witnessed your dedication and also the magic of what you do, both in helping me to completely transform, and I've witnessed you working with others, and just seeing the way that you hold space, and you hold that space for deep, profound healing. It's very, very magical. So just wanted to salute you, Juliet, and thank you for all that you do, all that you bring. And yeah, just hoping that everyone watching today has found this useful, and they feel inspired to get in touch and to work with you and open more to your wisdom and compassion and expertise. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rachel. I'm really touched by your kindness and generosity. And yeah, thank you. It's been a great privilege knowing you.
Oh, thank you. So what I'm going to do, people, is I'm going to, if I'll put it in the comments below. I'll put a link to Juliet's program if you're interested, and you can get in touch with her and maybe jump on that program and open to this healing journey, which is it's completely transformed my life, and I know it's transformed the lives of so many people to really start doing this deep inner healing work. So sending you lots of love, Juliet.
Thank you. Lots of love to you, Rachel.
Okay, bye for now.